Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 93. And my guest in this episode is Fern, and Bree is an accomplished associate creative director and writer with a diverse background and extensive experience in the advertising industry. And she's also a fellow Floridian residing in Miami, Florida. I'm a little further north of her, so we enjoyed talking about Florida off the mic, but on the mic we had a really dynamic conversation. We covered some terrain, and I enjoyed learning from her. She's an intelligent, brilliant person, and so it was a pleasure to speak with her and learn from her. So I hope you have the same experience as well, and thank you so much for watching the video and engaging with us in your way as a YouTube viewer. Thanks so much. I'd like to welcome Fern to the IdeaCast interview series, and I'm looking forward to a dynamic conversation, and I'm also looking to learn from Bree and just understand the world a little more when we're done with this conversation. So Bree, not that I'm putting any pressure on you, I'm easy to teach, so
Yeah.
But welcome. I'm so glad to have you here as a guest.
No, thank you. I don't know how you found me, number one. I am so appreciative of having this opportunity to be on the IdeaCast. You've had such an amazing amount of guests, and I'm just privileged to be on, this podcast and speak with you and share my story. Hopefully it helps some people and go from there.
Well, to reveal, one of my synthesis projects is to get those people in the high towers of academia to sort of build a bridge into sort of general audience territory. And it's already happening. It's been happening forever. There's accessible books and lectures. But I want to talk to also people. And so you're intelligent, you're academic, you have an academic background, but people who don't have PhDs necessarily, but are very curious and they want to learn, and they also want to sense make and meaning make and things like that. And so that's where I find that there will be, or I suspect there will be value in talking with you and other folks who are again, not in those high academic, they're not professors or lecturers or things like that. So I want that melange or that Creole of conversations where it's the ineffable or the very challenging ideas and thoughts can be made accessible and in plain spoken language that we can all work with, and just sort of up the value of what we're doing when we're trying to help people with self-improvement or sense making or any of those kind of things. So, and again, you're educated, you're intelligent, so you're on that spectrum of where I want to have those conversations. So anyway, that was long-winded, but
No, I think that's an interesting point. I think when, you and I were in school, there wasn't like the plethora of choices that, people have now, where they can get on Coursera, or they can get on YouTube, even TikTok, like just to learn things, very fast, very efficiently. You don't have to go to school anymore. You can teach yourself how to code. You can teach yourself how to be a graphic designer. And a lot of, I think Gen Zers are moving toward that direction, at least based on, what I see in my industry. When we do focus groups, long are the days where you hear, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. You hear a lot of, youth saying, I want to be a content creator. I want to have my own channel. I'm very entrepreneurial, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, I love the fact that there's a decentralization of the market systems and our economic the perspective of economy and market systems through the lens of, say, Gen Z or the younger millennials. And I applaud that, because I think we need a reconfiguration or even a reformation of how we engage in trade, exchange, barter, commerce, right, all these things. Yeah. So I'm supportive of Gen Z 100% and millennials, that because I've moved into this stage of the quasi elder now. And it's like, instead of being sort of siloed and cynical and, oh, you're not doing it the way we used to do it. I'm like, go do, experiment, fail, and succeed and do all these things, but do it differently, break the mold. Don't do what we did. I'm Gen X, and don't do what the boomers did, and all these things. And so I'm like to be a supportive elder in that sense, and an observer and somebody who can learn.
I think they see my generation particularly, like I took on so much debt. I'm not, maybe the Gen Xers did as well, and they just see what happened before them. They're like, why do that? Why can't we reinvent the wheel? And you know, working with them is quite interesting because, you know, things have been done a certain way for a long time, and then you kind of see Gen Z break the mold, and you're like, wait, you can do that? You can say you can't, you can log off after 6 and slam your laptop shut? Who are you?
What?
Like,
Yeah.
what? Like,
Alien.
you know, it's like this revelation.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a such a necessary frame break or shift.
Right.
Like, so the baby boomers that in the 60s, they did the sexual thing and the racial, they tried to advance racial equality and gender equality and all these things. And so, you know, hats off to them for that. But yeah, the paradigm of work slave, rent yourself out, that kind of thing, you know, don't question your position, your what is it, the caste system of economics and things like that. So yeah, again, I'm cheering on from, you know, I always like to say that elders are messengers from the future. Like, I'm still alive, but I'm a messenger from the future. Like, I can tell you what it's going to be like to be in your 40s or your 50s. I'm mid 50s now, but it's like, so you can take that advice, but also temper it with your perspective of who you are. So I would, in good faith, I would try to give the best possible advice. Again, not lens through the cynicism of my generation or my standards, normatives, things like that. But, you know, this is what I failed at, and I want to pass that on to you, because then you can fail differently and better, or you can succeed, or however it maps out. But yeah, support. I think supporting the younger ones. I don't know what the status is in this country. I don't know where we are, but I would like to think that. So there's this term filial piety, where the young ones are expected to honor the elders, like and in certain cultures, that's, you know, it's a time-honored tradition, and so there should be a reason for honoring the elders. It's like they're wise, or, you know, again, they're going to tell you about all the mistakes they made. But I also think that could be not asymmetrical. It can go both ways. So the elders can show reverence to the young ones who are failing gloriously and fabulously, trying new things, breaking it. And I don't mean fail in a bad way. It's like, I'm going up against a really rigid system, or I'm going up against a structure that needs to be reimagined, reformed, reframed, all that kind of thing. So that's something I would advocate for as a again, an emerging elder, is to say, let us help the young ones frame break. Let us be supportive, because we're part of the resistance. We're part of that structuralization, the perpetual structural restructuralizing of, you know, past things. Like, again, work yourself to death and resent everything, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. In my industry, I think it's it's funny because I work in advertising, the creative side. And sometimes you have bosses, creative directors that are younger. And, you know, there's a lot of Gen Xers that have them as a boss, or I sometimes have a boss that's younger than me, and I'm like pretty young. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. You're like, you're so young. How are you in this position of leadership? And, you know, it kind of takes some time to kind of adjust your framework in working with them and saying, actually, they kind of know what the hell they're doing, and they're in, you know, this position for whatever reason. And even a lot of startup founders are very young, and you have people of all, you know, ages working for them. But I think that's an interesting kind of move in our generation as well.
Yeah. And that's a good sign, I think, from a broader perspective, that shifts are occurring. So that if a 26-year-old or a 24-year-old can start a new company or organization that's functional and has purpose, that they are demonstrating that that this pathway, or that this new mode of service or product or whatever is achieving an ends. It's doing what it needs to do. Damn the convention. And likewise, those supervisors that by whatever reason or means, they show the acuity to get into that position, and that they're functional. And, you know, reality will out them for imposters. You know, that's a big fancy popular term now, imposters. You know, if they are posing as something, then the pressures of performance, I think, will thresh that out. So if they're there and they have a longevity, you know, despite politics or whatever, that again is proof of concept, perhaps, that things are changing, and again, that's a positive sign. So why don't we pin this? I took us right into a tangent, because I said we're gonna have yeah, we'll pin that for just a second, and then maybe bring that back in a little. I do want to get the audience introduced to you, and so we're both Floridians, but I'm a world away. I'm 150 miles north of you in sort of sprawling suburbia of the Treasure Coast of Florida. You're in Miami, and I love Miami. I grew up in DC, so I know city, but I'm getting a little like if I could live without a car down there and just move around on public transport, I would think of Miami. But I just love to visit Miami. it's like a holy pilgrimage. I go there 3 or 4 times a year. So enough of me talking about Miami. Let's talk about your past, where you've come from, cultural aspects of where you've come from, and if you want to talk about Miami, we can talk about Miami.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I feel like Miami is the perfect way to segue into where I come from, because if you know Miami, you know most of Miami's Cuban, aka me. I come from Cuba. A lot of the city has been built by Cubans during El Mariette, Peter Pan, the lifts from Cuba during those time periods. I came in the early 90s. I was born there during El Periodo Especial, which was when there was no resources or food means. And my parents had to go to very desperate measures, to find food or any, source of sustenance, which was difficult. My mom was a doctor. My dad was an engineer. It's very hard when you're a doctor in the country, because I think you have to wait like a certain amount of time to leave. So that was like such a rigmarole, but ultimately, getting the paperwork and working with the government, we ended up, being able to leave the country. I'm making it sound much easier than it was. It was definitely a headache for my mom and dad. But we ended up, leaving to Mexico, because that's what a lot of Cubans do. They leave Havana to go to Cancun, and they stay in Cancun for a while. So we were, in Mexico for some time. And then we came to Miami because my aunt, she sponsored us. So if you have a, family member in Miami or, the US, they can claim status for you. And so we all came and we lived with my aunt in Miami. And it was interesting, because being such a young child coming from Cuba and then acclimating to the US and kind of growing up in Miami, it's weird because a part of you is like, am I American? Am I Cuban? You have like, this identity pull to kind of identify who you are and making sense of it at such a young age. Because at my house, my parents would always speak to me in Spanish, but in school, I would speak in English. And when you're growing up, it's quite difficult to kind of code switch between both languages. I say this with a grain of salt, because for the most part, Miami is the capital of Latin America. Like anyone that comes down here will tell you firsthand, no one speaks English. You get into an Uber ride, they'll talk to you in English. You go to a coffee shop, they talk to you in Spanish. Sorry, they talk to you in Spanish in the Uber. They talk to you in Spanish in the coffee shop. You're like, where am I?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people that come travel here, like especially my friends from New York or Texas, and even DC, they call me and they're like, can you talk to this person for me? They don't speak English. I'm like, yeah, that's Miami. So I grew up in that, and I think it's changing a lot, because a lot of people during the pandemic from like New York and California have moved here, at least in downtown Miami, Edgewater, Wynwood. We have definitely seen like this renaissance of like tech culture coming here and established industry, and the infrastructure has completely changed from when I moved away maybe 8 years ago. And I don't even recognize the city anymore. I'm like walking down the beach and I hear like these accents from like Staten Island or from, Jersey or California. I'm like, now I'm the one that's like, where am I? I'm having like this cognitive dissonance. But going back to, growing up, I'm kind of gleaming over the fact that when you come to this country, especially being an immigrant and being a child of immigrants, there's so much pressure on you to perform, and your parents make sure you never live it down. Like they constantly remind you, we came to this country for you to have a better life. We made so much sacrifice. You need to perform. You need to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. If not, you're like a failure. So it's very grilled and ingrained in you that you have to do something of merit. And you don't know the wealth of opportunities that exists, because, coming from a third world country, those are the paths to some stability, right? Like in Cuba, you're either an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something very traditional. Whereas when you come to the US, like there's so many things you can do, but because I lived personally like in this immigrant Miami bubble, I only thought the pathways afforded to me were these traditional routes. So growing up, I was kind of groomed to be like a lawyer, I guess, because, my mom in her country was a doctor, my dad was an engineer, And I didn't know what other life forms and careers existed if it wasn't law, right? Because I love speaking, I love writing, you know, it just seemed on paper like it made sense. On paper, I'm like, oh yeah, like this checks out. So growing up my entire life, I remember watching, if you're Hispanic, you'll know Caso Cerrado, which was this Judge Judy, but like the Hispanic version, and she had such a tough bravado, and she was like no nonsense, it took no shit. I'm like, I want to be this woman, like not necessarily working for TV, but just like her confidence and bravado, and you know, group watching like Law and Order and all these things that inspired me to do it, which in reality, looking back, is so far removed from the actual profession. It's very Hollywood, it's very, you know, hyperbolic. And so, yeah, I was trying to be a lawyer for like the better part of my adolescence and high school and college. And, you know, I did the whole thing. I went to University of Miami and I graduated top of my class. And it was really hard because, again, my parents and this immigrant guilt of like having to perform, of, you know, having to be at the top, and all this weighs on you growing up. But you kind of think it's normal. You kind of think this is normalized, right? Like everyone's going through this. And so I ended up going to George Washington Law, which was a big accomplishment. I've never left the city. I've always lived in Miami. I've always been very sheltered, even at school, like I was a commuter. And then I get to GW my first semester, and being away from home the first time, being in a very competitive, high pressured environment the first time in this postgraduate like law school, or like was, you know, something to wrap my head around. And at first it seemed fine, and then adulthood kind of kicks me in the ass, and I had my first like psychotic break. And I remember being in the school and watching there's this old movie from the 70s called The Paper Chase. I don't know if you ever watched it. And I remember watching the movie before I went to law school and thinking to myself, oh my God, like this is not true. Like this doesn't really reflect what I'm going to deal with. And then halfway through, you know, my semester, I'm like, oh fuck, this is literally what I'm like, what I'm going through. It's insane. It really is. And, you know, I think a lot of it, especially the pressures that got to me was like, you know, being Hispanic, kind of thinking, oh, I'm only here to fill a quota, I'm not smart enough. And I had this imposter syndrome, and everyone came from like this pedigree and I didn't. And, you know, it doesn't matter, but when you're like really depressed and when you're having panic attacks and when you're spiraling, like you're just thinking emotion first, and you're just thinking like of all like the inner voices in your head attacking you and all these things. And I experienced my first psychotic breakdown, and it was a medically induced psychotic breakdown, which I didn't know at the time. And it just sent me into a wall of depression for like 7 months, which ultimately led me to defer. I had to defer from the institution because it was just awful. Like I ended up having agoraphobia. Like I couldn't leave my room. Life became really scary. I felt like a meat body, just kind of walking around the world, not knowing what the next step was, right? Like my whole identity was wrapped around being a lawyer. There was no plan B, C, or D. It was very much tethered to this prestige. And so having that happen to me and having like this disconnection of mind and body, and kind of going into this like very depressive state, which I've never experienced before. But I guess it was all these years of pressure building up, and then suddenly popping was what happened. And, you know, it lasted for like 7 months. I deferred. I had to go back to Miami. I felt like a failure because I was so proud to kind of leave home and do the thing like, you know, the quintessential immigrant daughter should, and then having to come back home and not knowing if I wanted to continue law. You know, it was detrimental, and it was a slap in the face to, you know, I felt like I let everyone down in my family, because they were all, you know, championing me to be this lawyer and make the family proud and yada, yada, yada. And then, you know, coming back, I was like, I don't even know if I want to do this. Like, and then I started asking myself, like, well, why did I go to law school in the first place? Oh, because my parents wanted me to do this. And I never once stopped and think in the middle of this marathon and sprint, what did I want? And so that sent me into another wall of depression, because I'm like, well, who is Brie? And then I had to start building up this identity of what, you know, I stood for. And it was really hard because, my parents just, they tried their best, but they just didn't have the resources available to kind of, to talk to me about how to handle depression. Like, they're very much like go, 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 survivor mode. They don't have time to feel anything. They don't have time to sit down and talk about what's wrong with you. They just want you to act. They just want you to execute. That's very much how I was raised. So I don't know, the reality that I had to kind of like sit down with my emotions and process was very foreign to me. And then I felt like something was wrong with me. And, my mom and I have a very complicated relationship. She tries, again, and maybe it's my therapy speaks kind of voicing in here, but she tries her best, but she's very verbally abusive. She had a very difficult upbringing, and she took a lot of her frustration and anger out on me. And I think maybe it's because she had to leave her country as, a medical professional and come here, and having to take on a lower paying job and not kind of have something of much prestige and value. So, she was very verbally abusive to me during this time where I kind of needed some hand holding or comforting. It was very much like, what are you doing crying? What are you doing wasting your time? Go back to law school, stop moping around. And I'm kind of giving you like the very PG version of it. It was definitely like much more intensified. I ended up going to therapy, and that's ultimately what happened, which, again, if you're Hispanic, you don't go to therapy. Like, it's just like therapy it's not even the vocabulary. I don't even think it has a direct translation in Spanish, like terapia, right? Like, you just don't do that. And therapy ended up helping me because luckily at that time I had this woman who was very much into John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness and mind body connection. And she introduced me to meditation and yoga. And then that's when I started to like slow the mind, kind of get off and wean myself off the medication, which, crazy enough, somehow I ended up in China to do, just throwing a wrench in the story. I ended up in China out of this like newfound obsession for meditation. And I was like doing so much research and asking myself, okay, like, how can I dive headfirst into meditation? Like, where does it stem from? Okay, it's Indian, but where else can I have like this really immersive experience? And at the time, there was this program called Wooden Fish, and this very well-known nun called Venerable Yifa runs it out of, China. And she's like super accomplished. She, I think, went to one of the Ivies, either Yale or Harvard, and, knows a bunch of people who are in the know. It's very Buddhist circles that fund the program, and they take like only 60 students, 30 male, 30 female. You go to China, you live with monks, and you do the whole experience, get immersed, do the Buddhism, teachings, meditate, tea time. Like, I lived the monastery life. I was very monastic. And in doing so, it's very cheesy and it's very kind of like cliche, but yeah, like, I think when you're in a period of stillness and when you're in a period of being so in tune with your body and knowing yourself for the first time, mind you, like, my entire world revolved around go, 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 survivor mode, immigrant guilt, never stopping or slowing down, never, having the tools and resources available at my disposal that didn't involve like berating myself or kicking myself in the ass because I didn't do something, or this shame of, the family or boundaries. Like, I didn't know this all existed. And then in doing this meditation practice and being able to slow down my thoughts and being able to kind of like discern, hey, this is right, this is wrong. And also surrounding myself with people who thought differently, because Miami is very multicultural, but it's very much Latin America, right? Yeah. So a lot of your friends, when they give you advice, it's kind of what they know, and they know what they know, right? They know what they see, which is what their parents do. But in being in China, I spoke with people from Russia or Mexico or from, the Northeast, and just how they kind of dealt with their problems. And in doing so, I ultimately ended up kind of gravitating towards writing. So, okay, writing's the next path forward. I always wanted to do writing. What does this entail? Okay, creative writing, advertising. So I ended up going to a master's portfolio program, combination of sorts, busted my ass to kind of get my foot in the door and kind of create a portfolio, and then ended up kind of working at some of the top agencies for creative advertising in New York, in California, in Texas. And, I've been doing that for 6 years. And now I'm, at this crossroads of, okay, do I continue? Do I kind of switch? Because I think when you hit a middle point in your career, you get so either burned out or jaded. I ended up having to take a mental health leave last year because the industry has seen this change where it's just moving at the speed of now, and clients want things immediately, and you have 2 days to kind of turn out a campaign. And it's things that are not really talked about. I can go more into detail about it later. But in taking this mental health leave, I'm like, okay, well, I originally did want to get into academia. So maybe I can start, dipping my toe in that. And I had taught in the past. I had taught in some portfolio programs, teaching students how to build their books. But now I just am starting as an adjunct at University of Miami. So kind of dipping my toe, going from there, maybe I do the more full-time track, because education, coaching has always kind of been in my wheelhouse. It's something I've always gravitated toward. And actually I'm running a service now, free at the time being, for people, students, interns who are trying to break into the industry. And I coach them and I give them, information I wish I thought I knew, and pitfalls to avoid, and how to negotiate their salary, and how to, make sure they're in the right company, or it's the right fit, or they're doing the work they want to do, or they have an advertising, you work with a partner. So I'm a writer and I work with a art director, designer. So making sure you have the right partner. So all these little things that at the moment when you don't have guidance or mentorship, you think you're doing something wrong. But, in talking to other people and having conversations, you're like, oh no, this is like pretty common and you shouldn't feel ashamed. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. And also, which I also gleamed over, because I'm trying to do this like fast track version of the past, decade or so of my life, is that during this mental health leave that I took last year, I had another psychotic breakdown. And when that happened, it got me thinking, because a lot of it is environmental, but a lot of it is there something else happening here? And I have a cousin who's a psychiatrist in New York, and she's like, I think you need to see a psychiatrist because, you've had medically induced like psychotic manic episodes before. Maybe there's something beyond what you can see and tell, and it's not, and you can't resolve it with your typical Zoloft, Paxil, Lexapro. Like, you need to kind of dig beyond the surface here. And so I saw a psychiatrist last year, and they did some evaluations, and they ultimately ended up diagnosing me with something. And it was hard because I thought I was normal in how I handle situations. Again, comparing my normal to my mom and dad. And thinking, oh, but I'm okay because I don't handle situations like they do. Like they're in the wrong. But then kind of having this realization, like, oh no, there is not that there's something wrong with me, but now I have this new identity, this neurodivergent identity that I have to come to terms with. And now everything's a trigger. And now everything's like navigating this new reality. And now going through these mood swings and this medical titration, and knowing how to talk to people about it is very difficult, especially in the circles that I'm associated with, because in the holistic, spiritual, new age community, like medication is a no-no. And believe me, like for me, it was like, I'm a big meditator. I'm big into mindfulness. I'm like big into hypnotherapy. I've done everything that you can name. I've hired shamans in Switzerland. Like you tell me, and I've done it probably. So, when you tell someone like, hey, I'm on meds, like it's, even to this day, like it's kind of like, oh, what's wrong with you? Why would you support big pharma? Like you're gonna, something's gonna end up happening down the line where it's gonna screw you over. And then you start feeling like, oh shit, like maybe you're right. Maybe I should get off the meds. And actually one time I did do that, because I have this friend who, she's very holistic, very spiritual. And again, like these are your circles and these are your peers. So you think that what they're telling you is fact, and you kind of don't believe the medical professions enough as it is, because the medical professionals as it is, because A, you don't do therapy. B, you don't take meds. My mom, she's a doctor, and she's like such a weird, just such a weird way of dealing with things. And again, maybe it's because she's an immigrant and that's how she operates, but like, you know, she went through a divorce and she's like, I didn't take any medicine. I looked at myself every day in the mirror and said, you got this, you're a bad bitch and you're going to continue forward. And I was like, wow, that's great. Again, I personally think my mom's undiagnosed and whatever. And that's probably where it stems from, but I digress. Yeah, so I did stop the meds at one point because a friend of mine was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, again, big pharma. And then this time around, I started going to support groups. I started listening to podcasts. I started doing more research. And in doing so, I was like, I need to be on this. Like, I need to be able to have a handle on life. I need to be able to stabilize my moods and my emotions. I need to shut people the fuck up because they don't live inside my body. They don't know like the chemical imbalances that I'm fucking dealing with. They don't know how I think. They don't know the environment I grew up in. And you have to kind of formulate a cocktail that works for you. I'm not saying meds is the answer. I'm saying it's the answer for some. And maybe your cocktail is meds and yoga and mindfulness, or maybe it's no meds. Maybe it's walking in nature every day. But like, just this shaming culture needs to end, because we're all different. We're all unique. Our brains are not, you know, made the same way, wired the same way. And, you know, again, it's very environmental. You can be borderline personality, you can have borderline personality disorder, you can be bipolar, you can be schizophrenic, but if you're not in that environment to trigger that, you can kind of go your entire life like pretty chill. But when you are in these like crazy environments that do trigger it, you gotta take resources that will help you kind of navigate life better, because life doesn't have to be this hard, even though everyone around you, and especially again, being an immigrant, being Hispanic, you associate success with struggle, and you associate pain, and you associate hardship, and everything has to be adversarial. Like if it's not adversarial, if it's not a struggle, if it's not a sacrifice, if it's not like difficult, you're not doing it right. So again, having to like reparent all this laundry list of shit that my family embedded in me, like, you know, you got to sacrifice your entire identity to you know, accomplish something, or, you know, you can't rest, you'll sleep when you're dead, or you know, don't do therapy, don't get these shrinks involved in your life, no one needs to know your business, or, you know, you have to stay the path and work your way up in this career, and you have to have a career of prestige. What will people think of you? We work so hard to get you into this country. Like, just having to take a step back and reframe all these conventions that my parents have embedded. It's been fucking hard. Like, don't get me wrong, because like my therapist said, it's like, I've had these principles at a subconscious level, like making me operate and, you know, go through life. And now it's having to break them down, dismantle them, challenge them, and go forward, and kind of seeing how life is now with these newfound, you know, philosophies of sorts. So this is where I'm at now. Again, the PG version without the chancleta throwing and like, you know, glasses being shattered against the wall. Right. And, you know, nothing short of a hospitalization, a psychiatric, you know, hospitalization. But yeah, so happy to talk about any certain touch point within my tangent, because that was definitely a tangent. I don't know if it made sense.
No, it was fluid and it made sense. And, you know, there are vector points on there that I want to go back to. So I'll preface everything I'm going to say by, and I think we talked about this in our pre-meet, Northern European extraction here, but my mother grew up in Venezuela, and her sister lived with me because my mother got divorced when I was 6. And the sister moved in, so I was basically living in a Hispanic household, even though we're all like this, right? You know, but they were arguing and yelling in Spanish, and they grew up and they went to school in Madrid, and so they lived in European Spain, and then also, you know, South America. So I have a taste of it. I have a so it's a priori knowledge, like versus a posteriori knowledge. I have a taste of the a posteriori knowledge.
Right.
I kind of have a taste of where you're coming from. But what I'm thinking here is that you're double damned in the sense that your family came from Cuba. No surprise, it's, you know, it's not a secret that it's a communist country. So we have a very utilitarian, structuralist, modernist culture framed by a Marxist materialist dialectic. And so Marx did some good things and he did some bad things, you know, and then it was, you know, lensed improperly and used for tyranny and all those kind of things. But coming from, again, a dialectical materialism, structuralism, utilitarianism, there's no room for compassion. There's no room for artistic expression. There's no room for thought in that regard. It's all very propositional, very utilitarian, very binary, all these very structured thinking. I'm setting that up as a framework for a kind of lineage that you have inherited. And I'm a believer in sort of kind of cognition that is extended by way of family. So that the parent's cognition is your cognition. There's straight mimesis, like the learning, the imprinting that you took on. There's cultural absorption. And so, yeah, it's no wonder that you are looking back now and that, you know, you've had things to contend with phenomenologically, you know, mentally, emotionally. And again, I say this with, so I have my own shitstorm, I have my own baggage. You know, I told you before we hit record, you know, I'm depressive. I used to be, I'm not so much anymore, but as an adolescent and a young adult, very depressive, very neurotic in a sense of self-destructive, you know, just bad vibes, bad stuff. And I'm still contending with the darkness and trying not to bullshit myself with escapism. But yeah, so it's very much understandable that you have a workload, a caseload, to contend with, and you know, sorting it out is you know, is a discovery process. It's, you know, the path, the journey, and you embarked on that with going to China and immersing yourself in self-help, self-transformation, or help and transformation by way of others. And so to address the sort of conspiracy of big pharma nonsense, I'll go and talk with any of these people who fed you that bullshit and say, okay, let me look at your life. Where's your escapism? What's your numbing agent? What's your drug? Because New Age self-help practices are a kind of escapism and numbing in its own right, if it's not done in good faith. So, you know, people can just go off to the moon and just bullshit their way into oblivion. And still, you know, they call it spiritual bypassing. And I'm being cynical here, but when practiced right, any spiritual practice can be productive. It can be transformative and transcendent. But when you're immersed in this world where you say things like, oh, you know, big pharma, you know, don't do that, you know, fuck that. You know, there are people who have genuine neuropeptide issues that they can't just hum their way out of. They have to have that intervention. So it's very dangerous speak to say that. And that's why I'm being cynical. It's full of, you know, it's just full of shit.
I actually want to say something crazy.
Yeah, go.
We're not crazy, but
you're safe here. You're good.
No, this is a safe space for sure. But like, you know, I've definitely been I was talking to a friend of mine that she was having you know, there's this whole psychedelic boom.
Yeah.
And there's this girl, I don't know her Instagram, or I don't know who she is. She's like a influencer. And my friend was interested in doing this journey with her. And her elevator pitch was like, oh, you know, it's so much better than you know, all these medicines that people are taking and having side effects with. And I'm like, this girl just became an expert in reading some sort of like psychedelic article or whatever. And then all of a sudden she's giving this information to people and people take it as fact. Because yeah, sure. Like, I don't know, if common sense were common, everyone would have it. But at the same time, like a lot of people are, you know, subdued into thinking this is real. And even my friend was like, what do you think, should I do it? I'm like, anyone that has that kind of synthesis of like why you should do psychedelics or why you should do shrooms, like I would never even talk to or consider like at all. Like, how are you saying, yeah, I'm sure psychedelics are some treatment options for some people, but just to kind of, like you said, like this binary, like it's all or nothing. Like, again, meds are not for everyone, but if you have some sort of, you know, chemical issue up there of sorts, you do definitely need it. And I don't think I ever empathized with that until I was in a situation or in a condition where I'm like, oh fuck, this is like reality. Like, this is my reality. I need to stop pretending my reality is someone else's reality and comparing myself and berating myself because I can't like meditate my way out of this. Or I can't, you know, see a shaman and burn a letter to the universe and everything's going to be okay. Like, I've tried that. Trust me, I tried that for years and here we are, right? So I'm living testament of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, we're all fingerprints. We're all different. We're all unique, and so there may be somebody dealing with trauma or a history of abuse or whatever that could go on an ayahuasca journey or eat
Right.
5 grams of shrooms or whatever, and maybe have a breakthrough. But there's also going to be somebody else who does that same thing and has a complete psychotic break and a crisis. And if it's not managed by a proper either shaman or facilitator or whatever, I would prefer a clinic, because there is an onboarding of psychedelic assisted therapy now in clinical environments where you have somebody with some background in psychotherapy or in the specific genre of psychedelic psycho-assisted psychotherapy. I would lean into that, like you said, versus somebody on Instagram that read an article and now is a guru, and they're just using the appeal to authority fallacy that, is cheap and thin, and it doesn't, it vaporizes very quickly when you press. I think it can be done right. But at the same time, and I bitch against, big pharma. I mean, every other ad I don't watch TV anymore, but when I used to watch TV, every other ad's for a drug. And so I think it can be abused. There is an argument to be had there that there's overreach, but nonetheless, in cases where somebody is dealing with a psychiatric issue, that it should be uncontroversial. That it's not something that you use as a fix or a cure-all. It's just therapy to get you by and sustain you and support you, along with talk therapy, along with other modalities that can move you forward. And again, a good faith clinician or a therapist, psychotherapist, can facilitate that. And the ends are not to keep you on drugs for the rest of your life. It is that, can we do a multifaceted or multi-perspectival approach to intervention and outcome? I think, it can be done right. And so to like you said, to put a hard binary on it and say, well, big pharma's bullshit, and go eat some shrooms and you'll be fine, and blah blah blah, or go do some other thing, and you'll be fine. It's like, that's just bad juju. I think it's just a bad recommendation.
Yeah, but I think once you start kind of asking yourself, is there something more at what I'm doing? And then going again, like finding the resources, like whether it's a support group, a podcast, reading, talking to people. Like I remember when I got diagnosed, I talked to a few people who had it. I'm like, oh shit, like, yeah, this is definitely something I'm dealing with. This is reality. Like, this is not just me, thinking it doesn't exist, or, just continuing life without the meds. Like, no, this is my new reality. Let me do some digging. Let me go, head first and talk to people who are dealing with it. And I did. And it was just like this new world. I was like coming out of the closet. I'm like, oh, wait, like there's people that have this too. And this is your reality. And you have these highs and lows, and you feel grandiose. And then all of a sudden you're depressed and bedrotting. Like, I want to talk to you. Like, how do you navigate life? Like, what are your triggers? What is, how do you do this? Because I'm like a newbie, right? A newbie who's still kind of much in the closet still, because again, we don't live in especially a Hispanic culture where everyone's going around undiagnosed. And I haven't talked to my parents about it. I probably won't, because they look down on it. And if my parents, my mom and dad definitely need to go to therapy or be on some form of medication, but it will never happen. And I'm not going to sit here and expect it to happen, because it's just a different generation and it's a different culture. I grew up in America. They grew up in Cuba. Like, that's just not something you do. Yeah. And so when I started separating myself a little bit from the spiritual, holistic community, which I'm still very much a part of, like I still meditate, I'm still mindful, I do a lot of affirmations, but at the same time, I'm very aware that I also need this assistance. And so it wasn't until I separated myself from the circles and who I was talking to that I was able to get a new understanding, and also see, talking to my husband's been a big support in kind of saying like, no, like you need to, look into this. Like, you don't have to, life doesn't have to be this hard. And another thing too is living with my husband. He's Canadian, so he was raised differently, and seeing how his family operated, and not that they're normal, but how they speak to one another. I'm like, oh wait, like you can speak to people and not be verbally abusive. Wow. Okay. So this is like a normal, like, or not normal, but like, this is a, safe household, right? Like, I grew up in a very verbally abusive household where anger was really much the undertone at, every point. And I was always walking on eggshells. And I mean, I didn't have the worst childhood, but again, like I just had this childhood where it was constant survivor mode. And sure, like you can operate like that in Cuba, and you can operate like that here if you're surrounding yourself with these individuals. But like when you start, I don't know, like I did when I left Miami and I started going into other industries, like you can't operate and continue operating like that without having some sort of like psychotic break. And you know what? The more people that I talk to that are immigrants or are people of color, because we have this need to constantly perform and prove ourselves, because we're usually like the first in this industry to do this, or the first to accomplish that, or you know, there's always like that tokenism, right? And then you're like, oh my god, I'm the first, so I have to excel and go above and beyond, and all this pressure just like all of a sudden just like bursts, and you end up in a hospital, or you end up bedridden, or you end up in like this depressive episode that lasts forever. Like, you know, I have close friends that worked on Wall Street, or you know, I remember when I got to law school, like it did cross my mind, because it is such a high pressured environment. And if you're not like, you know, on meds or even have the tools at that point in law school, I had no tools. I didn't know about meditation. I didn't know about yoga. I didn't know anything. And I remember like being in the lowest dumps of dumps and getting this email when I was studying that someone committed suicide in a nearby dorm. And I was like, oh my fucking God. And then that's when the thoughts start creeping in, because you're like, oh, well, there's an escape from this hell, right? But then again, you don't want to say that you're thinking this, because then you're going to end up like with this label, and if you're employed, drafted or whatever. So, you know, you kind of try to taper that. But no, like I think now that I'm older, I realize like, oh, it's not just me. A lot of people in high pressured environments are also going through this, and what you see on social media is not reality, which I think is very aversive. A lot of content creators or influencers, like everyone's posting their highlight reel while you're like in bed depressed as hell, and these people are like on boats or partying and life is good, and it's like life is not good. The human experience is, you know, ebbs and flows. Like if you're happy all the time, I'm sorry, something's wrong with you. You also need to be on meds.
Right.
This like reality, like this slow positivity of reality that you're like, oh, I'm depressed, like, or I'm sad. It's like, yeah, you're supposed to be sad. You're supposed to be depressed. It's called being human. It's called being alive. Like yin and yang. Like this world of where, like, you know, beat the negativity out of your mind. It's like, no, you have to talk to the negativity in your mind. You have to say, why are you there? What's going on? Where's this coming from? You don't have to say, get the fuck out of my mind, push it, resist, push, which again, a lot of circles I've talked to or was a part of, that used to be the thing, like full positivity, like, you know, think happy thoughts out of it. And it's like, not necessarily, like, accept these thoughts exist, talk to these thoughts, write them down, you know, to the best of your abilities, because when your thoughts are, you know, firing away 1,000 miles an hour, at that point, breath work, right? Look into breath work. Breath work, another big modality that has like really shaped my life, because my thoughts do spiral and they do go fast, and it is associated with how I breathe. And you know, able to do that helped me. And then when you slow down your thoughts, okay, then journal, constantly write down on notes, because you're going to have points where, and I've been doing this, which has been really helpful, when I'm very clear. I call them glimmers. When I'm glimmering, right? When I have these moments of like pure, rational, logical, like I'm in this Zen state, I talk to myself as if I'm waiting for this like manic breakdown to happen again. But I write from the rational perspective, like, hey, Bree, in this crazy manic whatever state, this is what you should do, and this is how we should operate. So then when I am going through it, I'm like, okay, who do I trust? I trust myself when I'm in a really good state. And then I look back to my notes and I'm like, okay, this is how I should do this. This is not me. This is a part of me that's currently depressed or currently spiraling or whatever. And let's go back to basics. Let's go back to breath. Let's go back to something that like this anchor that just like grounds me, because at those moments I'm not in a good headspace. And one thing that I have told myself and has been a game changer is that to never make like a big life decision when I'm in these spirals and this kind of like hectic mood of sorts, because I want to make crazy life choices. I just want to get up and move away to a commune, or I just want to get up and move away to Europe, and I just want to do all these crazy things. And I'm like, don't make any major life decisions. You can't make any major life decisions, because you are not rational right now, you are spiraling, you are manic. Okay, yes, if like you're in medical danger, sure, but like this is just a principle and a mantra that I know when I'm spiraling or manic or whatever, I always go back to don't make any major life decisions. And that has been super helpful. And I don't know, you know, anyone in your audience that can relate, but that's just personally something that's helped me kind of navigate this future forward.
That's a great management skill, to be able to have a conversation with yourself, because it may seem counterintuitive to kind of bifurcate yourself or have multiple aspects of yourself, but if you can recognize that there is a you that performs, and I don't mean that in a literal sense, but that you that comes out as expressing itself, that is manic, or that is, you know, in my case, it might be psychotic. Like I may want to go, you know, peel somebody's face off with a spoon or something because I get mad. Not that I do that, but I mean, it's like I'm being dramatic. But yeah, there's an aspect of me that could be capable of that if I get pushed and triggered or whatever, or I could be deeply depressed or whatever it is. And knowing that part of yourself, and Jung called that the shadow. And so what you were saying a little while ago, that sort of, no, don't. It's, you know, one of the philosophers that I follow calls it the cult of innocence, where we're just always supposed to be happy, and we always go to the light. We always go to the light, and don't worry about the demons. You know, don't worry about what's behind you or inside of you. And so I think that's, as you pointed out, is very very counterproductive and dangerous, because if you can work with that shadowy, that dark aspect of yourself and know it, and know when it's manifesting itself in your personality, in your expression with others, that you can be more self-aware and say, okay, I just caught myself being dark, or projecting that onto somebody, or doing a transference, counter transference thing, or whatever the hell it is. That's valuable, because that gives you more insights. Like you said, you journal out and you say, hey, future self that's having this episode, you know, come back. We're the same team. We're the same unified center of self, and I'm here for you, you know. And again, that shadow can teach you to balance and not necessarily oscillate so hard, you know, because a lot of our personality and I think our expression to the world as personalities is on an oscillatory scale. It is that, you know, we, by whatever the stimulus is in the environment, whoever we're interacting with, we express ourselves accordingly, and knowing that and being aware of that is valuable. And I think you spoke to that in what you just said. And the breath work,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, like, what, and you did mention it a little bit in what you just said, is the takeaway from the journey of mindfulness. It sounds like the breath work has had a great value for you, and being able to slow things down. So would you say that your journey in your path of discovery, say in China or post China, has helped you, you know, that mindfulness can be a tool for you?
You know, what's crazy was that I was so angry at mindfulness because it didn't save me, you know?
Yeah.
So last year when I had my other because when I had my first psychotic break, I was like, well, I didn't have these tools. So that makes sense. So like meditation will save me. And then the second time around, I was doing everything. I was doing like textbook definition of what you're supposed to be doing, and I never felt enough. And maybe that's in my nature, that it never feels enough, but I was working out 5 times a week. I was meditating 30 minutes a day. I was journaling, and I was angry. I was fucking livid because nothing was working. And that's when I introduced the meds. But again, at this point, that's another thing. Like the cocktail that works for you back then might not work for you now. And that's what I thought I should have been doing. Just doing meditation alone. But then this time around, I'm like, okay, what is everything that's out there? And while meditation, yes, it's breath work, there's other forms of breath work that exists. Like, you know, people do the Wim Hof method, people do Kriya. And I wouldn't say breath work alone is like the only thing that's helped me. It's one of the many things in an arsenal and a toolkit that I've built that has helped me navigate forward. But I will say, like, it is a big anchor, and it is one of the major things that I lean back on is the meditation, is the breath work, and doing a lot of retreats. I do, you know, for anyone that's interested, I do this retreat in North Carolina called The Art of Living, and they do Kriya breathing, which is fascinating. There's another an institute that does retreats in New York. It's called the Omega Institute. They're very helpful. I know there's one in Tampa with Michael Singer, or Orlando. Sure, he's pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm always researching ways that I can improve, my breath, or improve like this whole, taming of the mind and taming of the weeds of the mind, and kind of coming to peace and terms with like these inner critics and these voices. But yeah, I would love to say, yeah, man, breath work's the answer. Like breath, it's like that goalpost, like, yeah, just do breath work and your entire life is going to be changed. When for me, it's not. It's sometimes it's breath work, CrossFit, and meds. Sometimes it is meds and yoga and running.
Yeah.
It depends on where I'm at, and like
Yeah.
I have to be so in tune. That's one thing that meditation has helped me. It's being very in tune with my body and what it wants, because just like medications plateau or like stop, functioning for some people, so does your cocktail, and you have to kind of pick and choose like different ways that it works. And one thing that I did that was a big game changer for me was hypnotherapy. So I've been doing hypnotherapy now for a year, and a friend of mine who was battling anorexia, it really worked well for her, and I've been doing it now for a year for different, points. So anxiety, confidence, compassion, and it's so insane and how it works. Like at first you're like, is this even working? Is this even reprogramming my subconscious thought? Like what's going on here? And then all of a sudden, a month into it, I see the change in my voice.
Okay.
So I did I did anxiety, I did confidence in terms of the hypnotherapy. And then I saw those relatively fast, like activate in my thinking. But the one that took for fucking ever was compassion.
Okay.
I wasn't raised in a compassionate household.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what love is. Like I wasn't
Yeah.
the child that wasn't hugged. I wasn't like affection was very much like here's a gift, right? Like
yeah, here's a buck. Yeah.
here's a box. So compassion took a while to activate, but I remember, when after listening to the hypnotherapy of compassion for like maybe 2 months, a friend of mine did something that wasn't nice. And usually my immediate thought would be like, oh, this fucking bitch, like I've been there for her for so many occasions, and she's like coming at me with this bullshit. But then instead of that being my immediate thought must be like, oh, she's really hurt. She's probably going through something in her life. And I was like, who are you? Like, who is this? What is this voice in my head that is I was like, oh wait, this is a compassionate, hypnotherapy training activating. So that one was interesting. That one was like, because you never know when it's working until you hear the change in your voice, being a little bit more loving and caring and gratuitous.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. Oh gosh, I just derailed something that you hit on that I wanted to open up. But I'll start with the compassion aha moment. And so there's a kind of egocentric perspective of the world, and there's an allocentric where you're aware of the otherness of objects or the otherness of relationships. And that's a huge breakthrough that when you see that, so it's a form of empathy. You can embed yourself in that person's mind momentarily to say, yeah, she's fucked up, and that's why she does what she does. It's not me necessarily. I just triggered it, and then this thing happened between us. So yeah, that's good recognition. And damn it, I can't remember. I had something profound to bring back out of what you said, and I'll have to wait a minute till it pops back in. Oh shit. Let's see. Yes. It finally came back to me. Thank you, Justin's brain. The salvific narrative of, this is deep, like the nature of Western thinking is that we need a savior. We need a frickin' salvific miracle to make us better, and then we can move forward. And I think you hit on something super important, that's bullshit. Oh, you can be a religious person and use that as a narrative for development or what transcendence or whatever. But in the mundane, treacherous, dreary world of dealing with people and situations, seeking a savior or a salvific solution, to me is it's not wrong-headed. It's just needs to be either coupled with other things or that tempered to know that the outcome should not be that of salvation or emergence of transcendence out of a life or a psycho-emotional construct complexity that is just not going to get cracked by that. And you touched on that. And I want to just bring that back up because I think that's important, that we lens things, and Eastern traditions speak to that more. They're more like, this is an ongoing journey. You're going to go to your grave with your existential crises, and they'll tamp down. Everything could be on a sort of levels, like a mixing board for music, or you can meter things down. But to know that, and you've touched on this a couple of times, that you can carry your stuff with you through your journey. You can have it there. It's kind of like getting cut and you just have a scar, and you're not continually bleeding and suffering. It's just that the scar will always be there, which might be a kind of a weak metaphor for that. But I wanted to bring that up because I think that's very important, what you touched on there.
No, yeah. And I think another thing too, that I've been battling with a lot of things, but this notion of expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I hit my 30s, I had this expectation that I was going to be at a certain place in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And especially again with social media, and you comparing yourself to, I don't know, someone that invented socks and is now like a multimillionaire, and you're like, am I doing something wrong? Because I'm not 20 under 20. Like, am I the problem? And just shattering this notion of expectations, and I'm supposed to, and just kind of like, why should you? Like, there's no should, there's no supposed to. It is what is, right? Like, kind of meeting yourself where you are. Like, yeah, I didn't accomplish this at 30, or I didn't get to this at 30 because who I was at 21 setting these goals in motion has shifted, right? And here I am berating myself for not doing X, Y, and Z, when the person that set these goals in place at 27 or 26 hadn't lived life at 30 and was kind of future casting what it would be like. And so, what's that next goal? And again, it's this hedonistic treadmill of sorts. Like, this goalpost is always moving. And I think something I've battled with is, yeah, sure, I get to the destination, but then I see, I'm Mount Kilimanjaro, and I'm like, fuck, did I work this hard for this forest that I don't really care for? Now I have to find another goal, or like something else. And why do I even have to continue this hedonistic treadmill of like continuously wanting more, and like just never feeling like it's enough at all? You just never feel like it's enough, especially like in my generation, and how my parents raised me. It's like, oh, it's not enough to get good grades. You also have to be like, top of your class, or in whatever industry you're in. Oh, and that's not enough because you also have to be like a mom, like my parents. When are you gonna have kids? I don't even know if I want children, to be quite frank with you. And if that's not enough, it's like you have to be earning a certain amount of money. And if that's not enough, you have to be, you have to look thin. And it's just like all these expectations and all these societal norms that are imprinted on you, and they do subconsciously weigh down on you. And it's when you start shattering and reframing these things that you're able to have this like new form of freedom and liberation, and kind of set your own in place. And that's something I'm working on, especially in this, like, in my 30s era, right? Which everyone's like, your 30s are so fun and they're great, and I'm like, who the fuck?
Yeah. Not for everyone, but go ahead.
Who are these people predicating this false sense of like 30s living? Maybe it is for some people, but
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like, okay, my 20s, I didn't really know who I was, and I'm kind of getting a sense of who I am now. And their 30s, you're kind of putting it into practice, and maybe not, maybe more so, but like, I feel like now is when I'm really adulting, and I'm like, oh shit, like life is getting real for me now, and for some of my friends had to grow up really fast, right? Like, again, being an immigrant, I've had friends that had to grow up at 14 because they had to, one of my best friends, like, she had to help her family pay the bills, that like take on 2 jobs while going to school. Whereas, I will say in that regard, like, my parents were, awesome in the sense that like I didn't really have to worry about those things. But yeah, like, I think later part of my 20s and 30s, where I've been in the workforce after dropping out of law school, getting back into another profession, is when it's really hitting the fan. You're like, oh shit, like these expectations, these societal standards, social media, it's like navigating what you believe in, what your values are, and kind of going back to that, because if not, like, you're just pulled in so many directions. And this is the you just go on, like, you read an article and it's like, this is how to 10x your life wherever you're at, or this is the way to do the best work out of your life, and this is how you achieve maximum enlightenment. And it's like everything's about this best, or this not feeling enough, and this optimal, this superior state of being. And it's like, yo, can we just like chill and stop trying to optimize.
Yeah.
And just like, it just never feels enough. Like, even if you're depressed, you're not depressed enough, or if like you're happy, you know?
Yeah.
And I have this awful, I have a friend of mine, she's like, Bree, only you would burn yourself out from self-help. I remember I did burn myself out from self-help because all I would listen to were self-help podcasts, self-help books, self-help articles, self-help, anything on social media. And it just felt like I was never getting better because I was in this constant state of self-help because I burned myself out in whatever I do. And I had a friend call me up and she goes, start reading fiction. I'm like, what? She's like, just start reading fiction. And I started doing that, and I got taken away from this like constant state of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. How do I help my mind? How do I help this? And it's like, can you just like live? Can you just go to the beach and not listen? And I love Brene Brown, but not listen to Brene Brown for 3 weeks straight. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Go cold turkey.
Yeah, cold turkey. So yeah, maybe it's because I'm an extremist in whatever form of thing I do, but that was definitely a big help for me.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about this. I know where it comes from. This, do everything to the extreme, and it's a reflection of our we'll just say American market system, where everything is performance based, everything's meritocracy, everything is this kind of, you're a failure if you didn't do a 10 out of 10, and it's really exacerbated with your generation and the younger millennials because of the, like you said, the social media, and everybody's fronting on social media going, oh, look how fabulous I am, and blah blah blah. And then those things that say, well, if by 32 you're not a bazillionaire, or you're not, blah blah blah, that's a survivorship fallacy. I mean, it's a real simple fallacy. It's that, out of 10,000 people, we're only going to focus on the 16 people that made it, and the other 9,900 and some odd people, fuck them. Who cares? They're toast. And that's kind of our mentality. And it's like, no, that 9,980 some odd people, they matter, and they're where the narrative is. Because yes, you can sort through the people that did well, or whatever superlative you want to put on there, but I think the people who are doing the sort of more mundane, treacherous work of just being, I love the word satisficient. It's a portmanteau, so they're just in satisficiency. It's satisfying and it's sufficient, and you're moving through life. And so rather than lensing a paradigm of how to be through those 16 people, we need to relens through the satisficiency of doing well and coming home every day in shorter packets of time and saying, I did a good job today and I'm proud of myself. I have a roof over my head. I have food. I didn't kill anybody. Whatever your metrics are that you can establish for yourself, start small and work your way up, again, to a greater level of satisficiency. That doesn't ever have to be win, like, because everything's win or own, or so anyway, I'll stop on my tangent, but I just think that's something to accentuate that you had said, is that we really have to refigure this, or reconfigure this, and rethink what we want to do going forward. And this idea of a Darwinian, almost eugenics based survivor game in, again, market systems, in the citizenry, even in government, it's toxic, it's unhealthy to measure ourselves that way. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's something I kind of get on my soapbox about. It's like, guys, come on, let's not be so, we have to be performance based. We have to do good, but doing good and being a conqueror and that sort of patriarchal win, kill, own, that kind of stuff, that's bullshit. That's got to go away.
Yeah. The hustle culture, for sure. Again, ingrained in immigrant mentality. I think another thing in my toolkit that helped me take myself out of it. And there's this funny meme that says, oh, I thought I was depressed, but it was just America.
Yeah.
And then when I traveled to like Guatemala or like Indonesia recently, and I was just so fascinated by the people that live there, and they make so much out of so little, and how thankful they are, if you give them a tip, or how thankful they are just for having food that day. And I come from that, right? And one time I did go back to Cuba when I was 16, and I was so spoiled. I was like in my teenage years, and I went with my dad. And I remember going to my grandma's house in Cuba. This woman is such a G. She's 95 years old. She tames the farm. She's hilarious. She's like this evangelical, like 4'7" woman, but she's tough as nails. And so I go to her house and like they just recycle everything. They have no food or like no means of having like a lot of food where they're from. And they just, you know, try to make this feast for me. And you just see this like compassionate, caring nature from these people or my family. And when I went back home, like, I'm like, now I have to finish all my food, even if I go into a food coma, because there's people in these countries that don't. And my grandma's house, we have, and if you're Cuban, there's a service where you send food to your family through, you know, this website, and we send them like meats and chicken and all these things because it's just not happening over there. And I just have like this newfound appreciation for like when I eat food or when I have toilet paper, like even the most minimal minutia, like people don't have this access to in their country. And when I go to travel and I see that reality, I'm like, oh my God, here I am. And, you know, at the end of the day, whatever, you know what you know, but like here I am complaining about like internet speed that's not super fast when like grandma like just doesn't have, you know, a meal to eat that day because there's just no food in the area or whatever. And that again, like that being grateful has also shifted my mindset into like, oh, you know, thank the universe or thank God or whatever you pray, Allah, whatever, that I, you know, have this food in front of me, or that, you know, I have shelter and I'm fully breathing and capable, where, you know, when I travel, like I see just like these realities that kind of ground me and like, fuck, we are so blessed, especially myself, like to be in the position that I'm in, because some people would fucking kill for this. And they're so like, and even though they do lack these resources, they're fucking happy. And to me it's mind-boggling, because I'm like, here I am living, you know, have a beautiful home with my husband, and you know, my grandma's living in this like makeshift home, and she's like she's in a farm and it's filthy and there's hardly ever any food, and you know, we send food to her like every so often, but the process of it getting there takes forever. And she's so happy. She's always like in such good spirits. She has a smile on her face. Whereas here I am complaining again about internet speed or about my Amazon delivering being shipped to the wrong address. Right. So that's kind of been also something that's like awakened a different perspective in myself.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll share my story. I told you before we hit record, I went to Cuba in February 2019. And so the root word of humility is grounding. So I was properly humiliated going to Cuba. And so most people think embarrassed, or, you know, you're running around naked in public and mortified. No, this is more of a grounding experience. And so I got to the Fort Lauderdale airport to get on a JetBlue flight down to Holguin. And here I am, Mr. American Gringo, with my backpack. And that's it. I just had a backpack. I never travel with much luggage if I can help it. So but when I was in line, everybody had like 400 pounds of stuff, you know, TVs, just shit tons of bags and packages. And so that was first, you know, impression. And of course, I'm smart enough to realize like they're getting everything they can down there to the families and you know, friends and so forth that they can. So I get there and I go to a resort on the North Shore near Holguin. I think it was I can't remember. I'll butcher it if I try to say it. But anyway, I'm at this resort. It was built probably in the 50s or the 60s by Soviets, probably. It's austere. It's not terribly modern, but it's a resort. So I'm there, mostly Eastern European tourists, some Canadians, a couple Brits, and I'm like probably the only American there. And I'm there for the first night, and I go to the buffet, and it was an all-inclusive resort, and the food. I ate it because when I was a child, my mother foisted Catholicism on me, and they guilt the shit out of you, and you better, you know, don't make, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, I'm going to go Catholic mode here, and I'm going to be appreciative of this otherwise not off-putting food. It just was not appetizing. And I ate it. I was appreciative of it. And then the next day, I hired a cabbie to take me back into Holguin because I wanted to document their botanical garden there, because I love horticulture and botany. So he drives me in. I hired him for the day. Genius. Guy's got a master's degree, speaks like 9 languages, and he's cabbing because that's what's available. And so he says, I want to show you something. And he took me all over the compost. He took me all over the place to see. I wanted to document plants in the wild, various things that I could that I could identify. He says, I want to take you out to a little edificio in the campus there. And he goes, I want you to see something. And he took me out there, and it was a ration station. And he goes, this is what they get for a month. And so the tiendera, the person that was overseeing the counter there, you know, I saw the ration card, and you get like 5 eggs, kilo of rice, half a kilo of tobacco, maybe a couple other little things. And that's it for a month. So I tell you what, when I got back to that resort the next that evening to have my next meal, I was so freaking grateful for what I got. So the night before, it was performative. I'm like, oh Jesus, this shit looks terrible, but I'm gonna eat it because my mother and the Catholic nuns lectured me to. So it was, this time it was genuine, and I'm like, man, I'm eating the best of what's available. And people outside in the compost there, they would die literally to get this kind of food, even though most Americans would be like, are you fucking kidding me? This is, you know, this. So anyway, I'll stop there, but it just showed me that, you know, like you said, holy shit, I should be so grateful for coming back to Florida and having what I have and doing what I do. And like you said, the people were so amazing and so beautiful. And like they made do with austerity. They made do with hard scrabble conditions. Like the botanical garden I went to, the curator was an amazing woman, and I'm spoiled. Like Fairchild in Miami, like down in Coral Gables. Are you kidding me? That's like, you know, massive place. You know, $10 billion, you know, worth of stuff. And I'm in the Holguin Botanical Garden, and this woman is making do, and it was incredible. I have it on my YouTube channel. Just, you know, I documented it. It was absolutely beautiful, but lens through that perspective or that context that they have nothing. I mean, they have absolutely nothing to work with, and she still made it. Her and her collaborators made it a really beautiful park. And so again, it humiliated me in a great way. And you know, hats off to Catholicism, because that's one thing they did get right, is they make you understand that, you know, it can be worse. You know, it can be worse. So anyway, I was tangent. But yeah, I wanted to accentuate what you said, that, you know, there's first world, and then there's everybody else.
Yeah, and it's, I feel like you hear about these things, but it's not until you experience it yourself. Like that's why you mentioned the Cuban people bringing all these things to their country. I remember when I went, when I was like 17, 16, my dad made me, I was so embarrassed because I had to wear 3 shirts, 2 pants, 1 cowboy hat, and shoes 3 sizes too big for my uncle. Like these cowboy
God.
And I was just, my God, praying to God like no one would see me in this outfit, going to Cuba. But you know what? I stopped in line, and everyone was dressed like this.
Yeah.
Everyone was, you know, taking back things for their family. And then when I got there, I was like, fuck embarrassment, fuck, you know, all these stupid, like shameful kind of like, emotions that you get when you're living like in Miami, because Miami is very superficial, and that's like a whole nother conversation. Like, what car you drive, who you know, like everyone's, you know, leasing and probably bankrupt here. Very showy, very showy. And then you get there, like no one has anything, like literally no one has anything. And going to the ration station was very like eye-opening for me, because a part of me is like, why do you always, I asked my dad, I'm like, why doesn't my grandma always need food? She lives in a fucking farm. Well, you can't in Cuba.
Right. Yeah, you'll get thrown in prison.
Property, but some people do. I'm not saying my grandma's name here. And I remember going to the meat market with like my cousin's mom, and we're walking, and she's like, I have a surprise for you. I'm gonna make you steak. And I'm like, why? And then she whispered it in my ear, and I remember saying it loudly. I'm like, why is you making steak like a surprise? And she just like slapped me, and she she put me in a against the wall. And she goes, don't say that, you will go to jail. And I was like, oh my God, what do you mean? Because you cannot, you know, kill cows, like that's government property. And it's like these things that you're not familiar with. And again, like having like it was again, like you said, not the best steak, but the best steak spiritually that I've ever tasted. Because the trouble that they went to get it and make it happen. So again, like these things, that are you depressed, or is it just America type of situations?
Right. Oh yeah. I would wish that upon anybody who's struggling with first world problems, is to go somewhere and get a taste of that, because there's 2 things you can take away. First of all, the Catholic, you know, gratitude kind of thing, but also a new kind of ingenuity, or a new kind of, if you really take it away in a healthy way, of how to live that satisfaction, right, that I was talking about. Like don't try to be the billionaire, don't try to be the next Jeff Bezos or whatever the hell it is you're aspiring to, because that's illusory. It's bullshit, you know, and you know, look for that which really matters. So people who are living in hardscrabble conditions, whether it's El Salvador or Cuba or wherever, well, El Salvador's improved a little bit, thank God, but you know, that are nowhere near our lifestyle, that they do value the things that count: family, communication, love, trust, partnership, things like that. And what little they do get in terms of materiality is accounted for, and their relationship, if they're in a more rural environment, with nature and what nature can provide for them, and not seeking, like you said earlier, is this hedonistic feedback loop where it's like, oh, gratification, gratification, gratification. No, it's sustenance. It's a different type of well-being. So anyway, I would wish that upon anybody that feels as though they don't have enough here, you know, in the United States. And I'll put a caveat on that there are people here in the US who are in absolute abject poverty, and I'm not trying to be insensitive to that in any way. Those of us who are in that sort of middle bracket, I would say that might be good medicine. Yeah.
I'm happy you said that, because Miami's like, it's funny because I live in Edgewater, but just 15 minutes away, like your zip code determines your life longevity, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Like here, yeah, it's very affluent, but 15 minutes out, it's like, you know, like Overtown,
Yeah.
Alpaca, and you just go to your own backyard and you volunteer at these centers, and you see where, because when I came from Cuba, like, yeah, we were immigrants, we were living in like not the best conditions, and then, you know, and you volunteering in these centers and these communities, you're like, again, having a newfound appreciation, because these people are living below the poverty line, and they're experiencing injustice daily, and it's systemic. Like they can't get out of it because they don't have the resources and all that stuff. So you don't even have to go to Cuba or El Salvador. You could just go maybe 15 minutes out of your own zip code, and you're
sure. I've got it's not a funny Overtown story, but I got an interesting Overtown story. In 92, I went down to a concert in Miami Beach, and it was a band called Skinny Puppy, and if you can Google them, they're a fucked up band. I mean, they're really crazy. So anyway, I dropped acid before going to the show. I dropped acid like in West Palm Beach or Boca, and so they gave me enough time just to get out into the Miami Beach and get out of my car before I start tripping. Like,
perfectly.
Yeah, I had 45 minutes to get there. Otherwise, I'm not driving, right? Or I'm driving, but you know, probably shouldn't be driving. So anyway, I get out, go to the show. Get out at about 11. This was the show start. I got there like 6:30 so I could eat something, and then the show got out at about 11 o'clock. Anyway, I'm still tripping balls at 11:15, 11:30, and I'm like, damn, I need something to bring me down a little bit so I can focus on my driving. So I drove north a little bit, got off in Overtown. I wanted beer. I wanted some alcohol to take me home. And I went to this gas station. Of course, I'm stupid. I'm from suburbia. And at, you know, probably 9 o'clock, all the gas stations lock up, shut down. It's, you know, Fortress, you know, Fort Knox kind of situation. So they wouldn't sell me beer at this one. But I got out of my truck in Overtown at this gas station at 11:30 at night, all the crews that were hanging out were looking at me, and I was covered in blood because it was a violent show. So my head was shaved. I was bloodied, and my clothes were fucked up. You know, I just looked like I'd been in a big barroom brawl or something.
Oh my
and God. I'm like tripping balls, and I'm like just like got this weird look on my face, and I'm trying to communicate with the guy at the, you know, who's speaking through the little slot where you put money in. I'm like, you can't fucking sell me beer, you know? I was like not mad, but I'm like, are you kidding me? It's only like, what did they shut down like alcohol at one movie? Yeah. I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, fine, no, it's cool. And so I got it back in my truck, and the dude said, you know, go half a block up. There's a guy that has a liquor store there, and so I did. I went and got a 6-pack and drank it. But the guys in the parking lot were looking at me, and they're like, what a kind of weird,
you're like an outsider.
I was a freak of nature. Yeah, they were all just like, what? Where are you coming from?
Because my husband's Canadian, and he's white, and in Miami he's a minority. Like
right.
White here, like unless you're like in the beach maybe, and there's certain pockets, but like everyone's Hispanic or black or like you're Eastern European. It's a different world.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that was an interesting evening. But I met Overtown, and they were very polite. They were very nice, you know. Again, because I look like I just committed a mass murder, so they're probably like, "Don't fuck with that guy. Just let him go. We could probably kill him. We could probably jack him, but you know, let's just not. You know, like the odds were probably like they were like, nah, it's not worth."
I love how they were just like nonchalant too. It's like, oh, this, you know, white guy covered in blood. Okay, hi man, bye.
Yeah, no big, probably not a big deal. Well, and I grew up in DC, so being surrounded by persons of color I went to my junior high school there were like 4 white kids. Everybody else was Hispanic and Black. And so it was totally natural for me. In fact, when I moved into the community I live in, it's segregated. I mean, it's by choice, but and I can go in there and I get weird looks, but it's like nothing different here for me. It's how I grew up, you know. So yeah. So it's cash. But so we were talking about the austerity of Cuba, and then we'll go into sort of the, as you said, this sort of hedonism and the excessive consumerism of the United States. You were in marketing, and you are in marketing. You have a background in that. Maybe we can finish out our conversation by weaving together what we've been talking about and maybe what the forward direction is. Maybe you can offer us some insights into what would a healthy market system look like, and what would healthy marketing of a market system's availability in terms of service and goods look like. What do you want to cover there? Because I want to bring that part of you into this conversation to conclude, if you want.
No, can you rephrase the question?
So we've talked about like the abuses of not abuse, it's the overuse of a mindset of succeed, flourish, beyond thriving and consume and beyond satiation. This kind of excessive culture that we live in, like you said, hustle culture, like earn, buy, material, like you said, showiness of Miami's urbanity, and you have to have the car, you have to have the clothes, all that kind of stuff. What, in lensing it through your marketing expertise and what you've learned, let's unpack what you want to unpack out of that, what you think might be interesting to talk about. And so I know I'm not really giving you a good solid as far as a question, but like, if you could riff off of that. If not, I can
like marketing in the sense of like brands speaking to this ongoing phenomena, or
just like I think so. I don't think we need to critique advertising and marketing. It's manipulative. It hijacks either your amygdala, your oxytocin, or your dopamine and endorphins. It fucks with us psychologically, good and bad. It is to me, it's an act of desperation. Like if you have to repeatedly pound me with your Coke symbol or your McDonald's symbol, you're not doing something right, or I don't know, maybe I'm jaded, but so what would an ethically informed marketing system look like vis-a-vis where we are now, where it's oversaturation, it's penetration, it's manipulation, all these different things? And I'm being somewhat cynical and pedantic when I say that, but I want to kind of maybe put us in a space where, with your acumen and your insight, like how could we be ethically informed going forward for Gen Z? I don't give a shit about my generation or the boomers. But for up and coming.
Well, I mean, and I'm interpreting the question based on how it's flowing with me.
Yeah.
But I think based on a lot of what we've seen in the industry is Gen Z is very concerned with like, what is, this brand's ethos? How are they operating sustainably? For example, a good brand doing this is REI. They closed down for Black Friday, where that's like massive consumerism culture, and they're like, we're gonna opt out. We're gonna give our employees a day. We're not gonna participate in this. So we're seeing a lot of more brands do this. There has been contention because you can't be like Delta or you can't be like BP and create this like pro bono greenwashing campaign that you're trying to save the environment when the receipts show otherwise. And then you get canceled because the math is not mathing. You're not walking the talk. You're doing this because it's trending, when you should actually be reforming the system and kind of be like, hey, we fucked up, this is what we're doing to improve. Because again, like younger generations are seeing like the human cost, like, oh, is this being done by, child labor? Is this not sustainable for the environment? How does your board look like, right? You guys are doing these women empowerment campaigns, but your entire board is white male, right? So a lot of these filters are being used now in marketing or advertising, where a lot of it stems from the brand's persona, and it's no longer, and it's funny you mentioned Coca-Cola and McDonald's, because it's like the shittier the product, the more you have to advertise, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time you saw like a Ferrari
this is true.
advertising, right? But that being said, they're kind of shifting a lot more towards like, hey, this is what we're doing for the company. Like we're making 4-day work weeks. We're doing more mental health initiatives. We're doing a lot of these things that you want to kind of invest in a company or be behind a brand that's kind of taking this future forward. And it's not a toxic workplace, and it is inclusive of all genders, and it's inclusive of, you know, how you pronounce your pronouns, and it's inclusive of a lot of other things. Whereas like maybe, as you know, the way things were done before weren't maybe right. Like, you know, this working of weekends or working overtime and constantly being on call. It's always funny because in advertising we always say like, we're not saving lives here. If this banner doesn't go out by a certain time, or if this campaign doesn't launch, like no one's gonna die, you know, the world is not gonna blow up. Yet we treat it as such because it's such a pressure cooker, right? So there's definitely like that movement forward, and I think it's been interesting conversations, like this whole DNAI situation, right? During the George Floyd movement, Black Lives Matter movements, we saw a lot of companies, especially advertising campaigns around like DNAI efforts, and, you know, more focus on Black culture and the Black community and people of color. But now the studies prove that, you know, DNAI officers are kind of being let go. And at least in the advertising industries, like a majority and predominant C-suite is still white men. Mm-hmm. So all this talk and all this action that we were doing campaigns for, marketing for, is not really reflective of reality. And I think the future forward with Gen Z is kind of shaking this up and is not taking a stand for this and is not supporting companies or brands who are doing this. So that's going to be definitely interesting. And that's why we're seeing a lot of like I don't know if you're ever on social media, but you're like, oh my God, there's such an influx of like brands and companies. And it's because of this reason, because they're like, I don't want to support a McDonald's or a Burger King. We're going to create our own soda. We're going to create Olipop, which is probiotically based, or we're going to create, you know, something else. We're going to reinvent the system. Like, we're not going to create fuck taxis. We're going to create, you know, Uber. I'm not saying Uber is the mecca, but that someone else is going to be inspired to create a better Uber because they don't pay their workers well. So do you know what I'm saying? It's going to continue, like, at least with Gen Z, creating more ethos-based companies that stand for proper values, because at least that's what I've seen in the shift in the industry with working in that regard. And I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it's perfect. It's actually absolutely what I would love to hear from you, because I this is insight. This is something that it's like I'm partially aware of, or, you know, have bits and, you know, spotty awareness. And, you know, one thing for what you've just mentioned is that there is this monolith, this huge gravity force that comes from megacorps, big corporations. And I know when they see something innovative coming out of sort of a decentralized, more egalitarian system like social media and young upstarts, and that they either, you know, vacuum it up, co-opt it, or they crush it and recreate it and then try to pass it off. So, you know, you know, PepsiCo will you know, take an idea from something that. So I'm curious to see that this again, this monolithic corporate presence, how does what you're describing either relate in some kind of tension or exist in some kind of tension with that, or do we see the gradual decline of that megacorp structure to see more autonomous, decentralized, individuated agencies, entities, service providers, you know, product providers? What do you think about that? Where are we going in that regard?
Yeah, so we're definitely, at least in my field, there's the major players, right? Like the big umbrella agencies and WPP, IPG, Dentsu, Omnicom, that control all these advertising agencies like BBDO, J. Walter Thompson, or Wonderman Thompson, that have been around for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. But slowly but surely, you're having a lot of indie agencies pop up, or a lot of content creators pop up that can do this service for half the price and twice the speed, because they're nimble, scrappy shops, and there's not a lot of red tape, and there's not a lot of like crazy costs that they're kind of bulking into the price that no one knows where it's coming from. I think a lot of, bigger accounts like the McDonald's or Nike, it makes sense to be in a bigger agency because you have a lot of resources like production, and you have contacts and plugs. But we are seeing like a lot of dismantling of agencies of record. So essentially a brand would pitch an RFP and they would get the whole piece of the pie. They would get they would get broadcast, they would get social media. But you're seeing now a lot of individualization of smaller agencies where it's like a 2-person shop, 1-person shop, and they're like handling the entire social media, or they're handling not even the entire social media, just like a niche part of the business. Maybe it's like the paid ads, maybe it's like the influencer partnerships, maybe it's like out of home experiential campaigns, just because they want to give out more pieces of the business to maybe female-led agencies to say, hey, we're working with more female-led agencies or more agencies of color, or they're just very niche in what they're doing and they're turnkey versus kind of working with the bigger shop that kind of takes forever and it's a little bit more of an antiquated method. And then also too, we're seeing, I don't even want to say this out loud as a writer, but the rise of AI and ChatGPT and what that means for the industry. And you have to have a lot of, copywriters that are versed in these skills. And there are some smaller agencies that are like AI focused, and obviously brands want to, rally behind that. But I've definitely seen a lot of, and now there's this new position. It's funny because there's more positions being created, right? Like I'm a copywriter, but now there's this content creator position where brands are just, and agencies are just hiring content creators to do the work for the brand and coming up with the ideas. And they're literally like 1-person, 2-person, individuals just making this happen for a brand. And it gets more reach than a broadcast campaign, or it gets more reach than a billboard, because they have an audience of like, I don't know, like 30,000 people. It would make sense, for instance, let's say like if I'm a garden shop, right? A pretty well-known garden shop, instead of advertising, I don't know, on TV, it would make sense to advertise on your botany YouTube channel, because at least we know we have an engaged, audience that is behind this cause, that is watching this, versus just putting a billboard where your target audience could care less about, plants and herbs and all that stuff.
So it seems that it's, I don't want to say spontaneous, but it is its own self-creating and phenomena or entity. I'm struggling for words, but I'm getting what you're saying, and I'm happy. It warms my heart to know that there is a means in the undercurrent of, again, this huge strata of these larger entities with huge reserves of cash and stuff like that, that there is something inviolate that's not going to be fucked up by the will or the influence of larger actors and players, i.e. the mega corps and stuff, that this can happen and occur there, because I think that is a phase that needs to online and grow and develop, but again, always regulate itself, or maybe check in with itself both ethically and as well as structurally. Like, what is our structure? Like, do we just coalesce into another megacorp? Because that's how some big corporations started, was by like the automakers used to be 10 different types of car manufacturers, and then they come into one, and you have Ford and GM. So anyway, so that I would love to see for the upcoming generations, even Gen A or whatever, the new ones coming online that are just kids right now, that they can emerge into a world that is far more decentralized or far less centralized in terms of what's going on in market and enterprise. And I'll hope for that, because
fingers crossed.
Yeah. And the other thing is I love the idea of crowdfunding and sourcing capital from other means other than the stock market, because the stock market has become this bloated, huge bag of, speculation and day trading and all this kind of siphoning and not quite parasitizing, but epiphytizing of capital. And I'm visioning or hopeful that, that the sort of more individuated crowdsourcing and fundraising for small businesses and upstarts that will do that. And then also, to sound like Richard Wolff, that we have more employee-owned corporations, companies by young upstarts who say, let's not have a strong pyramid structure where there's a hierarchy. It's more that obviously people who have master's degrees in business and finance or engineering or whatever get paid accordingly, and the management people get paid accordingly, but that there's not a bloated corporate structure above, like you said, C-suite. that I would love to see vaporized, because it's important in a sense, but it's also something that can be integrated down into a more amorphic business structure, I think. And I don't know shit, but I'm just thinking out loud here that, you know, we can rethink corporate constituency and structures of power and structures of management and decision making, and the tech people, the people with the know-how. So
100%.
yeah. So what I would like to ask, I'll give you a choice. If you have a parting thought, something you want to share that you think is important for the conversation, or can you imagine what you are doing in the future, what you would like, what would be an ideal place to find yourself in 5 years, given what your trajectory is right now, professionally?
Yeah, no, I think I'll answer the latter question. I think I'm gravitating more towards a space of like coaching creatives,
Okay.
and academia. I love teaching, I love mentoring, I love guiding people through pitfalls that I personally went through. I think whether that's like in the advertising marketing space, or whether it's in the mental health space, gaining a new understanding of what I'm dealing with and being able to help someone that's, you know, coming to terms with this like new diagnoses. There's definitely, I think as you get older, you have this sense of like doing service-based work and giving back to the community. So I think the part that, you know, again, as an immigrant, that I'm having to struggle with this in therapy, it's like, sure, yeah, I've made it in like, in quote, air quotes, financially, working at these companies. But when you gravitate and move into these professions that are more service-based, yeah, you do take a monetary pay cut, but it's more fulfilling and it's more in line with who you are. I think a big part of me getting there is myself. Like, I am my own worst enemy, believing I can do this, kind of, you know, having to deconstruct this identity again that I've created for myself, or not created for myself, but like have developed along the process. And that's kind of what happened last year when I was starting to do it. I kind of like broke apart and everything fell apart in terms of like this identity I had constructed, and I have to have this new identity blossom, but you've got to plant seeds for it to get there. So it's going to be interesting to see in 5 years, you know, where I end up in kind of harvesting this future forward with, you know, whether I continue with academia, whether I continue in this like more coaching, mentoring, support group space. So that's kind of where I hope to see myself. And it's going to be funny listening to this conversation 5 years after, and seeing whether or not I'm there. So
yeah. Well, you know, you're anchoring yourself in a point in history. You know, it will be historical. But what a wonderful perspective to then be able to map your it's not even progress, it's just a trajectory, it's the path that you're on. And so here's to that. Here's to a lighthearted viewing or reviewing of this conversation, and a good reflection on this chapter of your life as you are in your new chapter 5 years from now. And, you know, you are a fount of wisdom by way of acknowledging and understanding your history, being honest with yourself, being able to self-reflect and say, okay, you know, these are the factors, these are the little points that, you know, brought about this, that, and the other. And I think, you know, working through the very physical, psychophysical, psycho-emotional ramifications of what's happened, you know, I will just be allied with you in knowing that, you know, you will do your best, you will navigate this experience, you'll have allies and friends that can support you, you'll have a healthcare system that can support you, on and on and on. So I'm coming to a point that to say that, you know, your intention to be of help and service to others is, to me, an indicator of a healthy part of the recovery process. It's a healthy element within recovery of, we could say, drama to trauma, wherever we are on the spectrum of having grown up and on board. You know, I've been listening or watching some things on attachment theory and how we, you know, how we imprint as children, and then when we carry that forward into adulthood, and there's really heavy shit going on in there. And I want to learn more about it, because I think it really does speak to, you know, we're always going to be those people that, you know, we're children. It's there. It's not that we move from childhood to maturity to more maturity to more maturity. Yes, we do, but at the same time, I think we are still those people that were having that experience. And so we can not necessarily communicate directly with them, but to more abstractly just, reassure that aspect of ourself that, either help is on the way or help is occurring, and helping to remediate whatever it was that happened. And I think that's the whole point of therapy and support, and transformative practices and things like that. And I think you're on a great path, a great journey with that. And the fact that you want to help others, to me, is it just speaks volumes for your what was ignored in your childhood, which is a capacity for empathy and compassion for others. And like you said, you had to work on compassion. It was something that wasn't onboarded. And and I came from a similar background. I can be pretty sociopathic when I need to, but I also make it a point to stay grounded in humanity, whatever that is for me. And anyway, so I want to thank you for this conversation. I want to acknowledge the fact that you showed a part of yourself that requires some willingness to be vulnerable and willingness to be transparent, but it is to an ends of supporting others. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that very much, that you were willing to do that. That means a lot. And I say that perhaps on the behalf of the audience, those who are still hanging on our conversation after a minute or an hour and 15 minutes or whatever, that they're here and they're learning from you. So thank you for that. These are the kind of conversations that I just absolutely cherish, that information is shared. And because I think when we realize we're not isolated, we're not fucking crazy, that we were one isolated incident, and everybody else, like you said, on social media, hey, everything's perfect, that you can speak to an example of that hey, we all to varying degrees go through this kind of thing, and that we can as a team work together to unfuck ourselves.
And I thank you for having this space for such a diverse audience to come and share their stories, to share their expertise, to share what they've learned. And I'm pretty sure you can attest that no matter how like high functioning or low functioning or whatever they've accomplished in life, we are all struggling to some point or other, and having to battle what is life, what is the human condition. And I think your guests and your viewers will see that in whoever you have a conversation with, that not everything's like all roses and sunshines and rainbows, but it is very much having to deal with this, reality of like identity, and this reality of like battling emotions and imposter syndrome. And whether you're an immigrant or not, just like the pressures of living in a capitalist society that is very hedonistic driven. So I thank you for hosting the space for me a lot.
Of course. No, it's reciprocal. We created something together. And again, I want to see it go forth into the world. And even if one person's life is changed by it, then man, that's enough for me. But it's not going to just impact one person. I'm sure it's going to have multiple interactions and introductions to ways of thinking. So, and to that end, I would say to the YouTube audience, thank you all so much for your attention. I will have Bree, I'll get some links for socials to people to follow you. So I'll make sure that's down in the description field so that you can continue to follow Bree's work, see what the chrysalis et metamorphosis produces for us in 5 years, and the beautiful mariposa that is Bree will be out in the world doing her work, doing her what she feels right and good and beautiful. I anchor 3 things in my life: true, good, and beautiful. I co-opted that from somebody else, but true, good, and beautiful. Let's start with that.
In 5 years, we'll have another podcast conversation in Spanish.
Oh goodness, Dios mío. I'll try. I will try. I promise. Because, like I said, my Spanish is embarrassing. It's like it's about a 2-year-old. It's like a 2-year-old.
Yeah, just I don't know. Go to Colombia, live there for 2 months, and I promise you'll be fluent.
Yeah. It comes out. Like I said before we hit record, I work with more than half a dozen Spanish speakers and a couple who don't speak English very well. I just love that because I can practice, and they put up with me because they're like, he's trying and he's doing well, and I learn onboard new words every week. And so anyway, I'll make that a point to try to show up with a bilingual capacity next time.
You might speak better than I do, to be honest, because my Spanish has when I moved away from Miami and I lived in New York and Texas, it kind of went out the window, and I was saying words in Spanish that didn't even exist, and my mom's like, what happened to you? Like, what are you even saying right now? It's slowly coming back together now.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but yeah, that is interesting. If you don't use it, you lose it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, thank you again. I appreciate again this conversation, and again, YouTube audience, thank you. And I'll see YouTube audience in the next conversation. I'll be speaking with Bree sometime down the future when some
Yeah.
fabulous things unfold for her, and I want to bring her back and have her share that with everyone. So Bree, I'll say goodbye to you after I stop the record. But again, YouTube audience, thank you for your time and attention.